There are 3 exercises that I love for starting to help people improve mobility from head to toe and feel better while doing it. Now, while it is true and important to appreciate that each human has its own complexities and nuances to their own individual situation, humans ultimately aren't that different. What I mean by is that most of us have a rib cage, a pelvis, 4 limbs, and a head. And we all are trying to move ourselves forward in the world. We're all trying to, in some way, shape, or form, create propulsion and locomotion so that way we can be effective, upright, and mobile humans. When someone lacks mobility at their hips, they oftentimes try to find it through their low back or their knees. When someone lacks mobility at the shoulder or the rib cage, they often try to use their neck to compensate in some way. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are things that we can give most people that will help them start to feel a little bit better. Now, as we get progressed through a program, it is important to have those individual differences there and addressing what's left over. But I feel good about giving people 3 things to work on that often will address a lot of these common underlying compensatory patterns. The first thing I want to do is just decompress the pelvis and the low back and take tension out of these areas, which should help loosen up our hips for better freedom of movement. A very common issue I see is that people have a lot of tightness on the backside of the pelvis, and this occurs for a couple of different reasons I address in other videos, but the idea is that the more the backside of the pelvis is compressed, the more it's pulling things closer together. So it's basically creating an environment where the femurs are pulled back and these bones are moving down and in, and that's restricting our ability to properly shift from side to side and also be able to express mobility properly within our hip moving into internal and external rotation. And that results in a pelvis that is just going to end up turning and orienting itself, which stresses the low back very commonly. So by opening up this space on the back side of the hips, we can decompress the pelvis and the SI joint and be able to free up motion and mobility at the hips. What we're going to be doing is laying on our side in a 90-90 position. We're going to have something underneath the top side of our ilium bone right here, top of our pelvis, and something else on the other side. So that is going to give us lateral compression on both sides of the pelvis, which is going to then in turn open up that space there. And that's going to help decompress the backside of the pelvis. So what we're going to do is get in a side-lying 90-90 position, meaning that we have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips. You can go a little bit less than that if you want, but around that 90-degree bend is going to be most comfortable for most people. We also have a pillow underneath the head, and you want enough support to where your head is nice and straight. It's not cranked to one side or the other. And also your head is staying stacked over your shoulders. It's not jutted forward or back. It's just nice and relaxed. We also have a towel roll underneath that iliac crest, which is the top side part of your pelvis. We'll put up an image so you know what we're talking about. And you should feel some passive pressure going into the towel roll. The towel roll only needs to be about a couple of inches. More than that, you're just gonna feel like you're side bent. So just a little bit is all you need there, a little passive pressure. And then if you have it, you can grab a kettlebell. We have about 16 kilos or 35 pounds here. You want to use generally as much as you're comfortable with without feeling any tension or muscular involvement in your body whatsoever. So for some people that's 20 pounds, other people that could be 60 pounds. It just depends whatever you're comfortable with. But regardless, you should feel zero pain whatsoever. You never, ever, ever want to feel discomfort during these exercises, especially this one. And then all Jacob's gonna do is try to stack his shoulders on top of each other to the realistic extent that is possible. And now we're really gonna work on the breathing. So everything is just chill, and this is what his focus is gonna be. Long, gentle, sighing exhale. Generally, the wider the mouth, the better. Think about your mouth as a water faucet. The wider it is, the more air you can get out. It's gonna be about 5 to 10 second exhale. At the end of that exhale, he's going to feel a little bit of side ab tension, his obliques, not his six-pack abs necessarily, but his obliques. And then he's going to close his mouth, put his tongue on the roof of his mouth, and then he's going to very gently inhale through his nose. It should be a silent inhale. That's going to make sure he doesn't engage his neck. And he should feel some expansion in his rib cage from front to back. And then he's going to exhale again. Softer and longer is always, always better than harder and more forceful. At the end of that exhale, he's going to feel a little bit of side abs, maybe just 2, 3 out of 10. Pause, close his mouth, tongue on the roof of the mouth, silent inhale. And he's gonna do that for about 8 to 10 breaths. The most common mistake here is rolling that top shoulder back that's holding the kettlebell. You don't want to do that because that's going to really compress the backside of your rib cage. So try to keep your shoulders stacked on top of each other in a vertical line. And if it's too uncomfortable, you don't like the kettlebell, just get rid of it. It's not that big of a deal. It just really helps compress your pelvis and really open up some space. But you're still going to get that a little bit with just the towel roll underneath that bottom side iliac crest. The other thing we want to think about is not overly crunching like this. That is usually what happens when people try to get a nice full exhale. Keep your sternum up, and as long as your knees are bent at around a 90-degree angle, all will be well. Now, did you notice I emphasized breathing a lot in that exercise? The reason for that is we're getting a little bit more bang for our buck because we are going to be able to open up and decompress the rib cage while we decompress the pelvis. The rib cage, just like the pelvis, is going to be very stiff if it is compressed from front to back and tight, especially in that back area right there. So by loosening up the rib cage with expanding it with our breath properly, we can properly turn and rotate and also get the scapula to glide better on the rib cage. But if there's too much tightness back here, it's going to be really, really restricted, and we're not going to be able to properly express proper rotation as we move through space. The second thing we want to do is work on the foundation of our body, which is our foot, and the foot's ability to change shape and be mobile enough to work with our hips as we move through the world. The main reason being is that if we improve hip mobility, but our foot can't interact with the ground in the way that it needs to, then we are never going to have any way to express that mobility properly into the ground. Think about it like this. If I strike the ground and I'm moving into early stance on one side of my body, that is more of an externally rotated position of the hip. Now, as we start to really turn and load our body weight onto that side as we enter more of this mid-stance phase, we need to have our foot arch flatten out and for our tibia to internally rotate. So that internal rotation is going to feed up the chain, and that is going to lead to internal rotation at the hip as we are loading our body weight onto that side. But if our foot can't change shape to accommodate that, then our hip mobility is effectively useless. And until we address the foot, hip mobility will never stick in a meaningful way. The most common mobility restriction I see is an inability for the foot arch to properly drop and yield into the ground and move into what we call pronation with ankle dorsiflexion. Now, there's two things I commonly see go wrong. In early stance, when we are moving into more of this heel strike to big toe contact right here with this negative shin angle, people have a hard time finding their heel, and they dump too far too quickly into the inside of their foot. That would be that overpronation strategy. So we want to learn how to properly set ourselves up to yield our foot arch into the ground and be able to properly load ourselves into this internally rotated position. So we want to train the transition from more of this outside heel position with more of this shin angle like this to more of an arch reference as we drop down, and that's going to allow us to achieve more pronation and set ourselves up for optimal propulsion. And if we can do this properly at our foot and our hip, we won't have a reason to compensate at places like our knees and our low back. So we're going to start in this position where we have this back foot. It can be turned out. It can be in whatever position you think is comfortable, feels comfortable, and it's just maybe a foot or two behind this lead foot right here. But on the lead foot, what we need to have is a negative shin angle right here, meaning that the shin is behind the foot, meaning that the foot is in more of a supinated state or a relatively higher arch position. So in order to get that, you can just lock out your knee, and that's just going to get you in the position where you need to be. I like to cue holding onto a rack because I think it just provides stability. You could hold onto a door frame, a countertop, whatever works. It's just going to make it easier for you, but you don't have to do it. And finally, what you want to feel in the foot itself is the outside heel and the first metatarsal head, which is this point right here, not the actual big toe here, but right there. So those are the 2 points you're focused on when the knee is locked out. Now, as Jacob subtly unlocks his knee, he is going to slowly, super slowly push his knee over his second toe as he transfers his weight onto more of relatively the inner heel and that first metatarsal head. So his arch is just going to drop a little bit, and he's going to not push it too far. If he goes too far, he's going to lose that heel. And just for this version right here, we really just want to focus on getting the knee in line with the toes, maybe a tiny bit beyond that, but really not much more than that. People will screw this up by going way too far, way too fast, and you're not gonna get anything out of it. So it's really important that we have a very slow intention here. Then he's gonna lock out the knee again as he moves back to that starting position right there. The biggest point of emphasis when you're starting to move into this dorsiflex position is you wanna keep your foot very quiet. You don't wanna see gripping of the toes. You don't wanna see any tension on the front of the shin right here. The question is how quiet can you make your foot and shin as you go through this? Think about your foot arch melting into the floor, and that is the exact feeling you're looking for. The other point of emphasis here is to make sure that when we initiate this forward movement, it's occurring mostly from this forward lean starting with the knee. So notice how Jacob's hips are slightly turned away from his stance leg. That's normal and that's okay, but you want the movement to initiate from the knee as you lean more of that body weight starting from that outside heel to more of the inside heel. And if the knee is tracking over the second toe, you're doing things well. Now, I know there's a lot to think about when it comes to these pronation drills, but it's really important we get it right because there's a lot of ways it can go wrong, but when you get pronation down well, it unlocks so much within your body. So this is the last thing to think about here, and it has to do with how we're going to lean. So we do want to lead with the knee like that, and we do not want to lead with our torso sort of leaning like that. If we do that, that's going to have our weight go way too far onto the forefoot. We're going to lose our heel. It's not going to be good. Now, one constraint you could add to make sure you're getting a nice inward movement of that foot arch is to give yourself a little bit of band resistance at the lower ankle and shin here. So you can see that this has enough tension on it to just subtly pull him out, maybe just a 2, 3 out of 10. It does not need to be much, because if it is too much, you're gonna go way too hard in the opposite direction, and then you're gonna collapse in and lose your outside foot. You never ever want to lose your outside foot. This is just giving you enough resistance to give you the idea of transferring your weight onto that inner arch without losing the outside foot. If you're having a hard time when your knee is locked out, you're feeling your outside heel and right here, you can't keep your big toe down, you can take a very small wedge and you can slip it underneath the metatarsal head of just that big toe right there. And that'll allow you to maintain better contact as you go through that pronation and dorsiflexion right there. Likewise, if you're having a hard time just feeling your arch stretch out or drop a little bit, you can flip it around so that way it's underneath all of your metatarsal heads right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the rest of your arch is off of it, and you don't need much at all here. If you use too heavy of a wedge or too large of a wedge, it is going to throw off the mechanics of your foot moving into pronation and dorsiflexion. We definitely don't want that. So really, this is all you need right here. The last thing, if you're having a hard time feeling your arch melt into the floor, is you can give it something to drop into. A paper towel about this size is great for that. So you can fold it like this, the lengthwise, and then you can go here, 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 and slip it under that arch. So that way his first metatarsal head and inner heel is still on the ground right there. If it is too far back or too far forward, you're not going to be able to feel your arch drop into something. And now as he goes forward, he can feel like it's dropping into that paper towel. But again, not at the cost of losing his outside foot. Now with the last exercise, it's a little bit more upright and allows us to stack our head over our shoulders, over our hips. Regardless of whether you're in this extended position or tucked under position, people ultimately need to learn how to stack these things properly to achieve a more neutral position. Neutrality allows us to then express freedom of movement. And it's not necessarily where you want to be at all times, but it's a really good starting place to be. We're going to utilize those foot contacts we worked on improving our ability to access in that first exercise on this as well. So if you didn't work on your foot mobility, then it's really hard for an exercise like this to be successful, which is why we did it first. If you like this type of approach that takes the whole body into account and you identify with a lot of the things I'm saying, check out my beginner body restoration program. It thoroughly addresses so many issues I see from head to toe, but also it's designed for pretty much anyone to be able to do it. So if you want to learn more, check out the link down below in the description. We're going to start with an object in between our knees that's a little bit compressible that allows our knees to stay in line with our toes. So it's not too large, shoving our knees out. It's not too small, making our knees collapse in. We're going to place it in between the mid part of our thigh there. Now, we're gonna get 1 foot length away from the wall. So take 1 step, place your heel in line with your toes of that back leg, and now get a toes straight ahead, hip width stance. Now we're gonna make sure that our head is stacked over our rib cage and our pelvis. So we want a lot of our back touching the wall with our head nice and relaxed, our gaze looking straight ahead. And then what we're going to do is feel the foot contacts of the inner heel and the first metatarsal head on both sides evenly. That doesn't mean we lose the outside foot and roll off of it. That just means that's where our focus is on both sides evenly. Our bias is there. Now, feeling on the wall, the most important contact of our low back is our PSIS. Those are those kind of bony spots at the back side of our pelvis. We'll put up an image to show you where that is. So Trevor's gonna be focusing on those foot contacts and on the wall, the PSIS evenly on both sides relative to what he's capable of doing. Now he's gonna place his hands on a chair, ideally something that he can kind of roll or push, and he's just gonna reach it away from him, not letting his sternum depress. So he's gonna stay, again, nice and tall and stacked, so he's just gonna reach that slightly away. That's gonna give him some protraction of the shoulder. His shoulder blade is gonna move away from his spine, but he's gonna remain tall. Now all he's gonna do is breathe in through his nose, silently, out through his mouth, sighing the air out. For about 5 to 8 seconds of an exhale. At the end of that exhale, he might feel a little side abs engaged, not six-pack abs, but side abs. He's going to maintain a slight contraction in those side abs as he silently, super slowly inhales through his nose, and that's going to give him some nice opening of the backside of his rib cage, and he should feel some expansion back there. All the while, remember, don't lose that PSIS on the wall on either side. Don't lose those foot contacts on either side. The biggest thing to watch out for here is people have the tendency to clench their lower glutes. We do not want that to happen. We are trying to stay as relaxed as possible. So please check in with yourself and ask, are my glutes relaxed? And if not, then what you can do is give that ball a little squeeze, maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10, not much more than that, before you try to find your PSIS contact and those foot contacts. So squeeze, then go, and that should make it easier for you to keep your glutes relaxed. The biggest mistake we see here is when people inhale, because we're trying to get expansion in the back, people have a tendency to stand up as they inhale because their ribs tend to be so flared in this like static posture that they have. We need the ribs to stay down, so maintain that reach. If not, reach just a tiny bit more as you inhale. That'll give you nice expansion of your back. But conversely, don't overreach. So if you overreach, you're gonna depress your sternum, and then you're gonna become really rounded and your head's gonna jet forward. Try not to do that. Try to make sure that you maintain that position you got with the PSIS contact and the foot contacts. Really, all you need to do is just maintain a slight reach with some protraction throughout the entire set, and you're gonna be doing things right. I would recommend doing these exercises in the order that they're presented and going about 2 sets at a time. For the sideline breathing exercise, I would do 2 sets of 5 slow breath cycles on each side. On the ankle mobility drill, I'd recommend about 2 sets of 25 very slow and controlled reps on each side. And on the 90-90 variation, if you want to include that, I would also do 2 sets of 5 slow breaths. And finally, the upright wall-supported reach drill, I would recommend doing that 2 sets of 5 very slow breaths. You can do this once a day in totality or twice. Twice is better than once, but once should get you started off nicely.